Donald Trump entering the week in a position he doesn't typically find himself in, with some of his most loyal backers low mo, as in low momentum, on spinning a bogus narrative about the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. Brand new reporting in the Washington Post reveals that Team Trump was caught flat-footed by the reaction to the DOJ memo that attempted to pour cold water on the existence of bombshell revelations in the government's possession. Claims spread most convincingly and prolifically by the officials who now populate the highest levels of Trump's own administration. From that new reporting, quote, Donald Trump is increasingly frustrated with his administration's handling of the furor around the Jeffrey Epstein files, concerned that the saga's unabated domination of the news is overshadowing his agenda. That is according to two people familiar with his thinking. One person tells the Washington Post this, quote, this is a pretty substantial distraction. While many are trying to keep the unity, in many ways, the DOJ and the FBI are breaking at the seams. Many are wondering how sustainable this is going to be for all the parties involved, be it the FBI director or the attorney general. Well, perhaps the FBI director or the attorney general should have dialed back the promises they were making on television about the existence of lists and other evidence, given that they were appointed by a president who has made no secret about his belief that the main function of the FBI director and attorney general is now to protect him. We have shown you many of the clips of Dan Bongino and Kash Patel pushing, clamoring, screaming about the release of the Epstein files. Remember, it is Kash Patel who lashed out at House Republicans back in 2023 by saying this, quote, put on your big boy pants and let us know who the pedophiles are, end quote. Kash Patel also promised full transparency during his Senate confirmation hearing.
So will you work with me on this issue so we know who worked with Jeffrey Epstein in building these sex trafficking rings?
Absolutely, Senator. Child sex trafficking has no place in the United States of America, and I will do everything, if confirmed as FBI director, to make sure the American public knows the full weight of what happened in the past and how we are going to countermand missing children and exploited children going forward.
Everything except release the Epstein material. And that was in January 30th of this year. Less than 1 month after Kash Patel said that in his confirmation hearing, his friend, the Attorney General Pam Bondi, goes on Fox News and says the Epstein client list is on her desk. 6 days after that, Bondi hands out binders to right-wing media personalities and influencers labeled The Epstein Files, Phase 1, a title that by definition implies that there are more phases, at least 2. All of this makes the July 7th memo declaring that there is nothing to see here. There was nothing. There was no client list. Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide in prison. All that becomes all the more confounding, not to us, but to Trump's own allies and supporters. Politico reports this, quote, the administration seemed to want to put the issue to bed quietly with this relatively terse and unsigned joint DOJ-FBI memo. Case closed was the notion. So what happens? Why does the tone change? Wall Street Journal reports that sometime in May, Attorney General Pam Bondi tells Donald Trump that his name appears in the Epstein files multiple times. The mere mention of Donald Trump's name does not imply any wrongdoing, but Politico reports this, quote, it may have triggered a critical inflection point in the administration's handling of the issue and its public statements on the subject. Since the release of the memo, Donald Trump has lashed out, slamming the media for asking questions about Epstein, even though most of the questions and complaints are coming from his most vocal supporters, who are the most steeped in this story to begin with. And they're the ones who've been pushing. Here's what Trump said today.
Mr. President, you have said that you have not been briefed on the Epstein files, or your name has not appeared in the Epstein files. But doesn't the AG have to tell you if your name is...
Well, I haven't been overly interested in it. You know, it's a hoax that's been built up way beyond proportion. I can say this, those files were run by the worst scum on earth. They were run by Comey. They were run by Garland. They were run by Biden. and all of the people that actually ran the government, including the Autopen, those files were run for 4 years by those people. If they had anything, I assume they would have released it. The whole thing is a hoax.
Whole thing's a hoax. That's why I kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago. Hoax. Doesn't even make sense in his world. He's even tried to dismiss the story as boring, and it is a lot of things. Gross, sordid, confusing, but boring is not one of those things. But most importantly, perhaps, none of this is working, really, for the first time. Even Trump's efforts on the Epstein issue itself, where he seems to be trying to get out of it, seem half-hearted and destined to really leave him where he is, which is politically stuck. And maybe that's by design as well. The DOJ pushing for the release of the grand jury transcripts of the case, which one judge has already rejected. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche's meeting with Ghislaine Maxwell has lots of people baffled. Here's what Chris Christie, who was once a big Trump backer, was in the running to be AG in the first Trump term, had to say about those meetings.
I have never seen this done, ever. The Deputy Attorney General runs the Department of Justice. They don't interview witnesses. And so I wonder, the first question that popped to my mind, as Sarah and I were talking about this, was, you know, whenever you're a line assistant or anyone who's interviewing a witness, you bring at least one agent with you, if not two. So there are a number of people taking notes, and there are witnesses there. We have heard nothing about whether Todd Blanche brought anyone with him to verify whatever he's going to report back as a third independent source. This is highly unusual. And if they're building a case for what and against who? She's in jail for 20 years and her co-conspirator is dead. So what exactly are they doing? It makes it look even worse. I think this is a bad political move for the White House. On top of it, it makes it look like one of the people that is being accused of covering up, Todd Blanche, is now in charge of digging out the truth.
So when you've lost Chris Christie, that's where you are. Team Trump, unable to find their way out of a mess, very much of their own making when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein, is where we begin again today. Puck News chief political columnist, MSNBC national affairs analyst John Heilman is here. Also joining us, White House reporter for The Washington Post, Emily Davies. She's bylined on some of that fantastic reporting we just read from. And former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Obama, MSNBC contributor Ben Rhodes is here. Heilman, let me start with you. And Chris Christie has been a critic of Donald Trump's for many years now, but I haven't seen such pointed and specific criticism of this team at DOJ from him yet. But he asks a very pointed question there. What is Todd Blanche doing, if not seeming to engage in a cover-up from the highest echelons of the Department of Justice?
It's a very pointed question, Nicole, and also a very unanswered question at this point. And it's a question that, as you will well remember, our friend Andrew Weissman raised on this program at the end of last week. And he made exactly the same point, I believe, on Friday, where he said, we have no idea if anybody was with Todd Blanche. Extremely unusual that Todd Blanche would be there. It made all the more unusual by the fact that Todd Blanche is not just the Deputy Attorney General, but also Donald Trump's former defense attorney. And the fact that we do not know at this hour whether anyone was in the room with him, and if someone was in the room with him, who that person was. And of course, it's fueled a lot of speculation, inference, suggestion, combined with Donald Trump waving off discussion, not waving off as in saying, no, of course, Ghislaine Maxwell will not be pardoned. I would never consider such a thing for a convicted child sex trafficker. No, Donald Trump twice has now been asked about it on Friday, and I believe asked about it today in Scotland, and both times has not has said, well, I have the right to do it. I mean, I haven't thought about it. No one's brought it to me, which is, TLDR of Donald Trump. Yeah, it's certainly on the table. I think that's a not unreasonable inference, and very easy to knock that down. So if you put those two things together, it suggests something very nefarious. Chris Christie didn't go quite that far in speculation as I just did and as some have done, many have done. But that is where we're at right now. And I will say, well, we can get back to this later. I want to get back to some of your timeline, but I don't want to hog the air at the top here. But I do want to get back to the way these perceptions are playing out among Trump supporters and what we're hearing from them now. And it's not just that Trump can't get past this. It's that every time he tries to get past it, he's making it worse for himself. He's just ensnaring himself further in the web of suspicion and the sense of betrayal that a lot of his voters feel over this issue.
If the Democrats want to have any chance at retaking the U.S. Senate next year, which is an absolutely crucial task in terms of, I don't know, not only the Democratic Party's future prospects, but maybe the Republic's future prospects. If the Democrats want any chance at retaking the Senate, they will almost certainly need to win the Senate race in the great state of North Carolina. Now, that is a state where a Democrat hasn't won a Senate race since 2008, which is 17 years ago. And so because of that sort of uphill battle suggested by that track record, Democrats have been really hoping they could recruit a really good candidate, like a blockbuster heavyweight candidate for that race in particular. Like, let's say you could invent a North Carolina Democrat who has won like a half dozen statewide elections. Let's say you could invent a North Carolina Democrat who has won statewide elections multiple times, even when Donald Trump was winning North Carolina on the same ballot. Let's say you'd invent a North Carolina Democrat who is a household name in the state, who has never lost an election in the state, who has high favorability ratings even after decades in the spotlight in that state. You'd have to invent him, unless you were able to recruit Roy Cooper. And today, Democrats got that wish when former North Carolina governor and former North Carolina Attorney General Roy Cooper announced that he is, in fact, going to run for that Senate seat.
When you made me your Attorney General, I prosecuted criminals and took on scammers, big banks, and drug companies. When you made me your governor, we balanced the state budget every year and worked with Republicans to raise teacher pay, recruit thousands of better-paying jobs, and expand Medicaid to more than 650,000 working North Carolinians. But right now, our country's facing a moment as fragile as any I can remember. And the decisions we make in the next election will determine if we even have a middle class in America anymore. I never really wanted to go to Washington. I just wanted to serve the people of North Carolina right here where I've lived all my life. But these are not ordinary times.
These are not ordinary times. And if anybody knows just how not ordinary these times are, it may be Roy Cooper, because the other thing to know about Mr. Cooper and this new race he's about to run, to Democrats' delight, is that this man has been through some things, some things that qualify him perhaps uniquely for this moment in Washington. He has served in North Carolina. He has not served in Washington, but he brings an experience, a level of political experience to Washington if he wins this race, which is, again, perhaps uniquely suited to this moment. And that is because during Roy Cooper's 2 terms as governor in North Carolina, Republicans turned North Carolina into kind of their anti-democracy pilot project. In 2016, when Roy Cooper ousted the sitting Republican governor of North Carolina to win the State House for the first time, the very first thing Republicans in the legislature did was they started stripping powers from the governor's office. Oh, the governor's going to be a Democrat now? Well, then no more powers for the governor. Republicans basically said to North Carolina voters, sure, okay, maybe you can elect a Democrat, but if so, we will not allow that Democrat to wield the powers of this office. For all 8 years that Roy Cooper was governor, Republicans were particularly focused on not just taking away his powers broadly, which they were, but explicitly and specifically they wanted to take away any control he would have as governor over administering the state's elections. They wanted that power to be in Republican hands. They're still at it. Last year, when North Carolina voters elected another Democrat to succeed Roy Cooper as governor, the Republicans in the legislature passed a law that moved control of the state elections board from the governor's office to the state auditor's office. Why would you give control over elections to the state auditor? That's a job for a guy who, keeps tabs on the state's finances. Why would he be in charge of elections all of a sudden? Oh, they gave that guy the job of administering elections or overseeing elections because while Democrats won the other races, it was a Republican who won the state auditor's race. So suddenly it's the auditor's office that should control the state's elections. In case it wasn't exactly clear what they were doing, right? That said, what started in North Carolina has really been embraced as a model by Republicans in other states. North Carolina has essentially been a testing ground for Republicans in terms of small d Democratic disempowering of the opposite party. And Roy Cooper has been their prime target. When it comes to taking power and then seeking a sort of autocratic breakthrough, using the power of government to stay in power yourself and to deny the ability to govern to your political opponents, North Carolina is where we have most practically been experiencing that in recent years before the moment that we're in right now. Which means that if Roy Cooper, in fact, wins this Senate race in North Carolina, he's going to bring some highly relevant experience to Donald Trump's Washington from North Carolina. Joining us now for his very first TV interview since announcing his Senate run is the former governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper. Roy Cooper, Governor, it's really nice of you to be here tonight. I know this is a really busy day for you. Thank you for your time.
Well, thanks, Rachel. Glad to be with you. And I'm certainly thinking about the family and friends of the officer in New York. Terrible tragedy. But thank you for having me on.
You said in your announcement today that you never really wanted to go to Washington. You only ever wanted to serve the people of North Carolina, which you've done as Attorney General and as a two-term governor in the state. But you said you were getting into this race because these are no ordinary times. What did you mean by that? What made you decide this is what you need to do right now?
There are so many bad things coming out of Washington that hurt the middle class and hurt people who are trying and dreaming of being in the middle class. Seeing the health care stripped away from them, seeing tax breaks for the wealthy and a pittance for them. Time and time again, we are seeing Washington hurt everyday people, taking food out of the mouths of hungry children. I've thought that I need to make a difference at a time like this. I need to run for the United States Senate because I've been able to work with Republicans in North Carolina, and I have been able to try and stop them when they do bad things. We expanded health care to more than 670,000 North Carolinians. We were able to put a plan in place that helps address the high cost of living for North Carolinians by eliminating $4 billion in medical debt for 2 million North Carolinians. I want to take those problem-solving skills to Washington and make a difference for North Carolina. I love my state. I love my country. It was time for me to step up yet again, and I'm ready to do this.
You talked about that health care accomplishment. When you ask Democrats and I think political observers around the country about your political record, the sort of signature political achievement that people go to right away in talking about your record in North Carolina is that you did get health insurance for more than 600,000 people in your state who didn't have health insurance before, which is just a generationally life-saving thing for regular working families. Given that, I can't help but note that the reason the seat is open is because Republican U.S. Senator Thom Tillis opted not to run for re-election, and he did that right after he opposed Donald Trump's massive bill that will strip health insurance from potentially hundreds of thousands of people in your state who currently owe the health insurance they've got to you. I just have to ask you about that. What does it say to you that Thom Tillis couldn't support that bill from Donald Trump and that he couldn't stay in his Senate seat after he decided to oppose it?
It shows that what Republicans in Washington were saying is not true. And in fact, 500,000 to 1 million North Carolinians could lose their health insurance, not just with Medicaid expansion, but on the Affordable Care Act marketplace. We built a coalition in North Carolina that allowed us to expand Medicaid and help rural counties. And I encourage people to go to roycooper.com and learn about what we did to expand Medicaid and try to learn about what we're going to do to move our state and our country forward, and we'd love to have you as a part of this campaign. But when I handed that Medicaid card to Penny on the first day of Medicaid expansion, I saw tears in her eyes, and we knew that we had accomplished something getting health insurance to people who had never had it before. Now, Washington Republicans are going to strip it away. And I think that is such a contrast in this race, because we know what Washington Republicans are doing to health care in this country. And we talk about lowering the cost of everyday working families who are holding their breath and waiting for that next car repair bill, worry about how they're going to pay for child care. They need health insurance. Every American needs health insurance. Here we gave it to more of them. They're going to take it away again. We're going to make sure that the people of North Carolina know about this. And when I get to Washington, I'm going to do something about it. So many people in Washington just want to be something. I want to do something. And I believe that rural Americans are going to let their members of Congress and their senators have it once they find out that they're about to lose life-saving health insurance. We need to get that message out.
Former North Carolina governor, former North Carolina attorney general, now U.S. Senate candidate Roy Cooper. Thank you so much for your time tonight, talking to us as your first TV interview after announcing you'd be taking the Senate race. Democrats all over the country have been sort of wondering whether you're going to take this leap. It's a really big deal for the country that you are in this campaign. Thanks for joining us tonight to talk about it.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm ready to roll.
Jake Sherman is co-founder of Punchbowl News and an MSNBC political contributor. With me in studio, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin and former federal prosecutor Paul Butler, who's a law professor at Georgetown and an MSNBC legal analyst. And we want to get to all of that. But Lisa, we just got word that Ghislaine Maxwell's attorney has filed a reply brief in Maxwell's months-long appeal before the Supreme Court. What did we learn?
We didn't learn much, Chris, that we didn't already know, and that's because a reply brief, by definition, isn't supposed to raise new issues. But for people who are unfamiliar with Ghislaine Maxwell's appeal to the Supreme Court, it raises only one issue, and that is whether Ghislaine Maxwell's prosecution by the Southern District of New York, starting in 2021, should have been precluded by the agreement that Jeffrey Epstein struck with prosecutors in Florida in 2007. She says that that agreement should have bound all of DOJ for all time from prosecuting her because it covered co-conspirators of Jeffrey Epstein, including but not limited to 4 named individuals, none of whom were Ghislaine Maxwell. But that is the only issue on appeal to the Supreme Court. And obviously the other part of it is now that the briefing is complete, the Supreme Court can act at any moment to either deny review of Ghislaine Maxwell's conviction or to schedule it for argument and briefing in the fall.
So while we wait for that, and as you say, it could come any time, Paul, this idea that Todd Blanche asked Maxwell about 100 people certainly grabbed a lot of attention, right? But does that sound like someone who is not leaving any stone unturned, or someone who maybe is on a fishing expedition?
It sounds like the Deputy Attorney General is on a fishing expedition to see whether Ms. Maxwell has the goods on Democrats, which is what President Trump is saying that the investigation should be about. It's clearly not about any further exposure by Ms. Maxwell because she's been given immunity. The question is, if Ms. Maxwell really has new information, why is this just coming up now? Typically, when defendants, including convicted folks, agree to talk to the government, it's because they're trying to get a lower sentence. It's often part of a plea bargaining process or something that comes up before sentencing. So why now? Ms. Maxwell, in every legal proceeding, has maintained that she had no idea that Jeffrey Epstein was a sex predator, that she didn't even know that there were any underage girls on the property but for one employee. So the question was, is she lying? Was she lying in all of those other court proceedings, or is she perhaps lying now to try to get in the good graces of the Department of Justice?
Jake, asked about the possibility of a pardon on Sunday, Speaker Johnson said he didn't want to get ahead of any decision by President Trump, but then he added this.
if you're asking my opinion, I think 20 years was a pittance. I think she should have a life sentence at least. I mean, think of all these unspeakable crimes, and as you noted earlier, probably 1,000 victims. I mean, you know, it's hard to put into words how evil this was.
We already knew, Jake, that there was this problem in tamping down the conversation about it. But to the conversation itself, has that even gotten trickier for Republicans? That in many ways, the more they get out there, oh, she's talked to 100, or she talked about 100 people, the more questions it even raises.
Let's talk about this from Mike Johnson's point of view. He's leaving himself zero wiggle room here, zero. And if Trump were to pardon Ms. Maxwell, it would be quite embarrassing because the Republican leadership on Capitol Hill is very hesitant to be seen as doing anything contrary to Trump's wishes or wants. And Johnson is right in that he doesn't have a role in this, but he's the leader of the Republican Party on Capitol Hill, and he's expected to have a view. And to be honest with you, of all the issues that we've seen during the Trump years, the flare-ups, this is among the most vibrant, let's call it, the issue over Jeffrey Epstein and releasing the documents. We've never seen House Republicans go against the president as they have when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein and the so-called Epstein files. So one of the most combustible issues that I've seen on Capitol Hill in a long time.
And you see many of his supporters trying to explain away some of the things that have happened, or let's say offer an alternate theory. Take the case of Republican Markwayne Mullin, senator, and his conversation yesterday with Jake Tapper. Take a listen.
2009, there was a sweetheart plea deal that was made underneath the Obama administration with Epstein.
Right. That's not
and
right.
that sweetheart has not been exposed.
No, it was 2000.
Oh, it's not? Well, when was the case heard?
It was 2008. It was the U.S. attorney at the time was a guy named Alex Acosta. He was a Bush appointee. He went on to become President Trump's Secretary of Labor. It all took place in 2008.
Who was in office at the time?
2008, George W. Bush.
Who was in office at the time?
George W. Bush.
No, 2009 is when the case came out, and it was and Obama was in office at the time.
It's not true.
So, Jake, are Republicans basically at the mercy of legal developments and the DOJ, or alternatively, they just have to put forth a narrative that is easy to fact check as false?
Yeah, I'm not really sure where Mullin was going there. I mean, this is like a Wikipedia-able fact to look up. It was Mr. Acosta who did go, hey Siri or something like that. You could look this stuff up. Mullin has been among the more stauncher defenders of Trump's handling of this case. I mean, but he's an outlier, to be honest with you. I mean, you see Trump allies, especially in the House, having basically no patience for these documents continuing to be secret. So they're not as much at the mercy, to be honest with you, as a whole, as Senator Mullin is indicating he is right there.
Jake Sherman, thank you for that, which brings me to you, Paul. And we learned last week that the DOJ had done this yet another exhaustive read-through, search through these files. The Washington Post now says this, quote, after concluding that fewer than a tenth of those documents could be considered for release, staffers were asked to go through them at least 4 times more. The ultimate result had seemed obvious to many of those involved from the start. It was memorialized in the Epstein memo. There was no unreleased evidence that would expose any additional third parties to allegations of illegal wrongdoing. What are the chances now, given the breadth and depth of the investigation into this, again, across 4 separate venues, 4 separate entities looked into this, that something new is out there? Or is it possible that, as MAGA hopes, investigators never got the full story from Ghislaine Maxwell in the first place, the person who they think might know best?
And so the New York Times reported that the FBI and the Department of Justice spent thousands of people hours combing through every bit of evidence against Epstein and found nothing that would lead to charges against anybody else. So I think it's unlikely that Ms. Maxwell now has something that none of these agents or prosecutors found. And the question about a pardon is, why is that even on the table? If you look at what she was convicted of doing, not only did she groom predators, not only did she groom victims by promising them to take them shopping or giving them money for travel or school, she was actually present during many of the acts of sexual assault and indeed participated in some. A pardon wouldn't be necessary.
Can we just say the stories from the victims are remarkably consistent?
They are.
It's not like one person came forward with one story, somebody had another story. They're consistent, right?
Yes, and she's been consistent in denying, so if she suddenly changes her tune, that would certainly raise major questions about her credibility. The bottom line is a pardon isn't even necessary to secure her cooperation. All they have to do is immunize her, and they can compel her to come to court, come to Congress, and tell the truth.
He is rebuking the base, almost like spitting in their face. Like, they are asking for it. He campaigned on it. He puts Bongino and Cash in there, which might be the stupidest thing in the history of the world. Like, why would you put the two guys that have nonstop pounded the pavement talking about how we're going to expose this Epstein thing, and the second they get in there, like, you better shut the up.
Yeah, to shut him up.
Go on Rogan, lie. Like, it is a very peculiar thing. It worked in that I think it moved any of the smoke off of Trump. Because, at least for me, I was like, there's no way that he's involved if he's putting Bongino and Cash in, who have campaigned on exposing it. Like, why would you hire those guys or appoint those guys, right? So I'm like, he can't be. But the fact that he will not touch this, and then this last week, him doing the distractions.
Bro.
Dropping the MLK file. Like, who asked for the MLK file? The second he started talking about Obama, I was like, oh, he's guilty.
Yeah.
Also, why are you talking about Obama and treason? You got a guy who has sex with teenagers that you are protecting.
The Epstein stuff is so crazy because when Kash Patel was on here and he was like, there's nothing. And I was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
I didn't even know what to say. My thought was, and people are like, why didn't you push back more? My thought was like, I'm just going to put this out there and let the internet do its work. Because there's nothing I can. The guy's saying there's no tapes, there's no video. That doesn't make any sense. Everyone knows it doesn't make any sense. The whole thing was nuts. And then he's like, well, we have a film. We're going to release that film. And the film has a minute missing from it.
Yeah.
Like, do you think we're babies? Like, what is this?
The backstory, of course, FBI Director Kash Patel, who was on Rogan's show last month, promising to release everything that the administration could. But Patel has since faced blowback from Trump supporters after the DOJ earlier this month released a memo confirming that Epstein had died by suicide and that there was no evidence the financier had a client list that could lead to more prosecution. So, John Heilemann, you're our Manosphere correspondent, and I wanted to get your sense as to why you think this is a rift. We know that the Epstein conspiracy theories really erupted on the right, and President Trump, for the first time, has been unable to sort of put it back in the box. Like, these people, Rogan, Schultz, the like, they're not letting it go.
Yeah, they're not idiots. And a lot of those guys like Andrew Schultz and Joe Rogan are really have been portrayed as being MAGA media. They're not really MAGA media. They ended up siding with the president in 2024. You know, famously, Joe Rogan was a Bernie Sanders guy for a long time. And you can listen to Andrew Schultz. He talks about how much he likes Zohran Mamdani. They are anti-establishment. They are anti-elite. And they are to not about Rogan, but if you listen to that Andrew Schultz podcast with Ezra Klein the other day, he's done with Trump. I mean, he's finished. He's moving on. He thinks Trump is now, to Andrew Schultz's mind, at least as I listened to that 2.5-hour podcast, he basically is like, Trump has revealed himself to be just another elite politician who's covering up for the rich and famous. And that is, of course, the huge political risk here for Trump. He has misread his core constituency and what they want and what he stoked from the very beginning. And I will say, as we come back around, I agree that the prospect, the only reason you're going down having Todd Blanche go down and talk to Ghislaine Maxwell this way is at least if a pardon is on the table. That's what she's going to want. There's no reason to send Todd Blanche down there if you're not going to have that conversation. And if they give her a pardon now,
it will do nothing but make this worse. Because again, the Andrew Schultzes and Joe Rogans and many of the people on the base, including people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, will see that for what it is. She's the woman who knows everything, and she's going to be given a pardon now with Mike Johnson saying she should have a life sentence. She should have worse than a life sentence. If she's given a pardon to stand up and say Donald Trump did nothing wrong, no one in Trump's base or in the manosphere or anyone else who wanted to have clarity about Jeffrey Epstein, no one is going to believe it. It's going to make Trump look even guiltier. Yeah. Another potentially vast misreading of what he has unleashed here.
Yeah, that would be an extraordinary firestorm. And Ali Vitale, let's go to you. You cover the Hill. Let's talk about Mike Johnson, who, for so much of his political career has prided himself. No daylight between speakership and the White House. But yet now, I mean, for a week, 2 weeks now, he has been willing to break with Trump on the matter of Epstein. What is that reflective of? Is that his constituents and, frankly, his caucus talking to him about it?
Yeah, it's the realities of the conference, right? Because no daylight works when you're passing legislation that's in lockstep with the White House. Every Republican wants to say that they notched a legislative win. But on this, there's a much more complicated dynamic, especially when these folks have to go home and talk to the very same voters that for years they and Trump, hand in hand, promised transparency on this issue. And so the speaker has had to toe this very delicate line of knowing that none of his members want to be seen as the ones that have their names stamped next to Thomas Massie as the ones that buck the White House. But none of them also want to have their names specifically on the dotted line to be the ones that held up the release of the files that they promised to release in the first place. And so this really is a merry-go-round of Republicans facing their own campaign promises and now the consequences of not fulfilling them. I think for Speaker Johnson, it was interesting on Meet the Press this weekend, the way that he seemed to say, well, the reason that I'm not behind the bipartisan push for transparency on the Epstein files is because the Khanna-Massie legislation doesn't have enough protections in it for victims. Okay, if you actually have that as your only concern, you could go back to those same two legislators and say, this is the problem I have with it. Can we offer an amendment? Can we rewrite a piece of the bill? That could be something that's actually a pretty easy fix. And so if that's the central problem, there's a way to get around that and actually pass this legislation. And so the speaker is clearly trying to buy himself some time. Senators have been even more transparent about that they want DOJ to be able to buy the time to talk to Maxwell. That's, of course, problematic for all of the reasons that Lisa and David have pointed out. But this is a stalling measure that's only bolstered by the fact that August recess is on the calendar every year. President Trump announced a trade deal with the European Union yesterday, averting an economic war between the two allies, at least in the short term. NBC News Chief Justice and National Affairs correspondent Kelly O'Donnell has those details.
On the president's own turf.
Thank you very much. Congratulations.
One battle in the tense trade war over. A much-anticipated deal between the U.S. and Europe reached at Mr. Trump's private club in Scotland.
It's a very big deal. It's the biggest of all the deals.
This new framework comes just days before the president's evolving tariff deadline of August 1st.
We have a deal. We have a trade deal between the two largest economies in the world. And it's a big deal. It's a huge deal.
The White House says the president paused his private golf outing here to meet with the EU Commission president at her request. Ursula von der Leyen represents the 27-country alliance, among the largest U.S. trading partners.
It will bring stability. It will bring predictability. That's very important for our businesses on both sides of the Atlantic.
This preliminary agreement sets a 15% import tax, far less than the threatened tariffs of 30 and 50%, but still a real cost. The president emphasized that Europe also agrees to make new investments and buy American military equipment and energy.
It's going to bring a lot of unity and friendship.
The impact at home. Nashville small business Flora relies on supplies from Europe. And Kirby Howitt says she is hit with this kind of tariff.
It's a lot to shoulder for small business owners because we're taking care of ourselves. I have a family. And then I have employees that I feel responsible for.
Another question? The agreement does not determine tariffs for popular European favorites like wines and spirits.
We're going to circle back on the wines and spirits. Thanks to NBC's Kelly O'Donnell for that reporting. And joining us now, business reporter for Semaphore, Rohan Goswami. So I want to start by getting your take on that agreement between the U.S. and the EU. On the one hand, analysts are looking at it saying, OK, this isn't going to stop the flow of global trade between two major trading partners, but there's still costs that are going to be passed on to consumers.
You know, Ali, you and I have talked about this. Trade deals are not easy. They're hard. They're hammered out over years, and they take a lot of input from business, from governments, and that's not what happened here, right? This was an impromptu meeting. Trump graciously deigned to pause his golf round to meet with van der Leyen. And it shows, right? There are a lot of questions we have, as you said, about wine and spirits, but also about, take, for example, steel, which is one of the highest tariffed goods coming out of the region right now. There's still a 50% tariff on that. You also have questions about the pharmaceutical industry, right? I mean, if you think about some of Europe's largest exports to the U.S., it's pharmaceuticals, it's drugs. Those are supposed to be hit with tariffs. At the same time, the president is saying he wants to bring healthcare costs down for everyday Americans. So, you know, like as with many things, it's a mixed bag. There's no question that these trade deals, the threat of tariffs, they're working, right? The impact on the consumer, we haven't seen yet, right? Inflation remains generally in line with estimates. The Fed still hasn't cut rates, in part because of the uncertainty. But other than that, we're not seeing an impact on the consumer yet. That being said, with a 15% bump to cost, we probably will pretty soon.
Yeah, especially because, and I've had other folks, including you, come on this show and wonder if the reason we're not seeing the impact of these tariffs yet is because businesses knew that they were coming and were able to stock up in the short term, but then are going to have to look at again at their product line and say, okay, is it now that we start passing the costs on to consumers? If and when is the game that we've been playing. I think the other piece of this deal, both with Japan and then with the EU, that caught my attention is the way that there are these massive investments. It's $600 billion for the EU, $550 billion from Japan. And my question was, what does that actually go towards? And I was struck by one White House official telling the Wall Street Journal over the weekend that the White House could use this as something as a sovereign wealth fund. Can you explain to folks what that is and why that would be a very interesting move with ripple effects for a White House to make?
Sure. A sovereign wealth fund is exactly that. We have these in America. Alaska has enormous natural gas and oil wealth and has actually created a special fund for its citizens that pays them out a check every single year. Countries like Norway, like the UAE, anyone that has abundant natural resources, a lot of times they'll turn to create these things when they're government owned, but for the benefit of the people. Trump has been fixated on a sovereign wealth fund since before he took office. It's not surprising that he might want a personal investment pool with which to dole out favors or prop up certain industries. There's a problem with that, though, which is that natural resources, while they're owned by the American people, aren't generally exploited by the government, right? We cut deals with American companies who exploit it in return for concessions. So we don't actually own things. We don't own oil reserves and make money off of those the way that Norway or the UAE or Saudi Arabia might. Now, as you pointed out, the Japanese deal includes a very unusual provision, $550 billion worth of investments and funding that's coming directly from the Japanese government. This is an allied nation that's basically agreed to write Trump a $500 billion check. And that's unusual for a Republican president when you think about the idea of a government deciding who wins and loses, right? I mean, the point the Journal made was that Trump could decide to fund a new semiconductor factory for Intel, right? Which is something we kind of did with the CHIPS Act, but at a much larger scale. And you're seeing this government take steps to move in the public markets already. Just a few weeks ago, they took a $400 million, I think it was, stake in a publicly traded company that deals with rare earth minerals. This is something that, as far as we could tell, was unprecedented. And it points to a larger desire by Trump to control the direction of the economy on a granular level that, other than wartime, most presidents haven't shown an interest or an ability to do, right? He's talking about not letting companies pass along costs of tariffs. He's talking about controlling auto imports. It's quite unusual.
Yeah, it's unusual, but then when you also extend it to the way that he's trying to pressure the Fed, which is typically its own independent branch, it all does fit that larger model that you're talking about. Rohan Goswami, there's so much here, but we're going to leave it there for now. Thank you, as always, for coming on.
Always a pleasure.